5 spots.
Before we start, make sure to remove the battery and the power adapter. On the bottom of the laptop, slide the latch to the right and the battery out. Loosen the 8 retaining screws. Remove the access door cover from the laptop. Loosen the heatsink screws. Remove the heatsink from the motherboard. Remove the 4 2.5mm by 8mm screws. Unplug the hard drive connector. Lift the hard drive out of the laptop. Remove the 4 2.5mm by 8mm screws. Lift the hard drive out of the laptop. Disconnect the antenna cables. Under the battery, remove the 2.5mm by 5mm screw. Remove the 9 2.5mm by 8mm screws. Turn the laptop over and open it up. Unsnap the media cover, starting at the back and working your way around the edges. Unplug the media cable. Unsnap the keyboard bezel, starting at the corner, and work your way around the keyboard. Unscrew the 4 2mm by 3mm screws. Lift the keyboard up and turn it over. Unplug the keyboard cable. Unplug the backlight cable. Loosen the right side antenna cables. Loosen the left side antenna cables. Unplug and loosen the camera and LCD cable. Unplug and loosen the power button cable. Remove the three 2.5 by 5 mm right hinge screws. Remove the three 2.5 by 5 mm left hinge screws. Lift the display away from the base. Remove the four 2 mm by 3 mm screws. Disconnect the four palm rest cables. Carefully remove the palm rest from the base. Remove the three 2.5 mm by 5 mm screws. Remove the optical drive from the laptop. Unplug the audio cable. Unplug the fan. Unplug the infrared sensor. Remove the five 2.5 mm by 5 mm screws. Remove the express filler card. Remove the SD card blank. Lift the motherboard away from the base. Unscrew the two 2.5 mm by 5 mm screws. Remove the DC circuit board from the base. Place the DC circuit board onto the base. Replace the 2 screws. Place the motherboard into the base and make sure not to cover any of the cables. Press firmly above the DC circuit board connection to make sure it seats properly. Replace the SD blank. Replace the express card blank. Screw in the 5 motherboard screws. Plug in the infrared sensor. Plug in the fan. Plug in the audio cable. Place the optical drive into the laptop, pressing firmly around the connector. Replace the 3 screws. Place the palm rest onto the base and press around the edges to snap it in. Plug in the 4 palm rest cables. Replace the 4 screws. Place the display assembly onto the base. Replace the right side hinge screws. Replace the left hinge screws. Plug in and reroute the power button cable. Plug in and reroute the LCD and camera cable. Reroute the left side antenna cables and feed them through the motherboard. Reroute the right side antenna cables and feed them through the motherboard. Plug in the backlight cable. Plug in the keyboard cable. Turn the keyboard over and place it into the base. Replace the 4 screws. Replace the keyboard bezels starting at the bottom and working your way around the edges. Plug in the media button cable. Snap the media button cover onto the base. Close the laptop and turn it over. Replace the 9 base screws. Replace the screw under the battery. Place the hard drive into the laptop. Press firmly on the connector to make sure it seats properly. Screw in the 4 2.5mm by 8mm screws. Plug in the antenna cables. Place the hard drive into the laptop. Plug in the hard drive connector. Screw in the 4 2.5mm by 8mm screws. Be sure to clean the heatsink and reapply thermal pads and compound before reinstallation. Place the heatsink onto the motherboard. Tighten down the heatsink screws in the numbered order marked on the heatsink. Replace the access door and tighten down the 8 screws. Slide the battery into the laptop until it locks into place.
We hope you found this tutorial useful. All parts discussed in this tutorial can be found at partspeople.com.